Hey folks, hope everybody's doing well today. We're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about how to make the easiest bread you will ever make. Because if I can do it, you can do it, and start your bread baking adventure. Let's get started. First thing you're going to need a bowl that you can mix in and that you can let this proof in. We're going to keep everything in this bowl until we're ready to pull it out and get it ready to bake. In addition to that, you're going to need a spatula or a spoon. On the video I used the spoon because I couldn't find the spatula. I prefer the spatula, but either of them will work. You can use a wooden spoon. I've done a wooden spoon before as well. You are going to need 3 cups of flour. You can use all-purpose flour, you can use bread flour. I've done both. Haven't been able to tell the difference. You're going to need some salt. Salt to taste. I kind of just eyeball it. So figure it out. See what you like, what you don't like. You can always do another one if you need to. This is an Italian recipe that I'm using, or an Italian loaf recipe. I use Italian seasoning. It's fantastic. I put a tablespoon and a half, maybe a little bit more in, just to give it some added flavor. You can use anything you want. You know, I've done raisins and cinnamon. I've done cranberries. You could do rosemary. You could probably use some of the shaved peel from an orange and cranberry. I think that'd be really good. I might try that one. But really, you can experiment and see what you like to taste, and just keep changing it as you continue to do it. You're going to need 1/4 teaspoon to a 1/2 teaspoon of active dry yeast. I like to be more on the half teaspoon side. This one that I'm doing in the video, I used a 1/4 teaspoon. It might give it a little bit more rise if you use a little bit more. So you're going to need that. Let's see. Measure out your yeast. Just need some teaspoons. You're going to need 1.5 cups of water, warm water preferably. It can be cold. Once you mix all those ingredients together and get your dough ready to proof, you're going to want to cover it. You can use plastic wrap. You can use a damp towel, dry towel. Just make sure you've got something to cover it well so that it doesn't dry out during that process, during that 3-4 hours. Once you're done with the proof, you want to, and you shape that dough, you're going to want to set aside a piece of parchment paper that you'll put that onto, so that you can put it down into a bowl while you're waiting for your oven to preheat. While you're shaping that, it's not a necessity, but it certainly helps. I didn't get this until, I don't know, after I'd done a number of loaves, but a bench scraper helps you shape the dough. Super cheap. You can find them on Amazon. In fact, you can get it comes with several different tools, and this would be part of that. Once you have that shape, you're going to need a bowl to put it in while you're waiting for the oven to preheat. You can use any bowl that works. Again, you're going to want to cover it with the plastic wrap or a towel as you're waiting for the oven to preheat. Once you're ready to bake, you need some sort of dish to bake that in. I started with just a casserole dish with a lid. You know, I put it down into the center, and it worked just like the Dutch oven that I got a little bit later, which is this one here. I use this now for my loaves, ceramic Dutch oven. All right, and then one last thing is, again, not a necessity. You don't need it because you can just set, once the bread is done, baking, you can just set it aside. But have some sort of cooling rack is really helpful as well. To be honest with you, this came right out of our toaster, so I pull it out and use it as a cooling rack as well. And once you've got all those things together and the bread is baked, you're going to end up with a fantastic loaf just like this one that you can enjoy, family can enjoy, and you can use it with anything that you need. All right, let's get started on the video and we'll walk through the process and the ingredients and the recipe, and you can see how it's done. Enjoy.
All right, we're going to take our 3 cups of flour, put it in the bowl. We're going to mix all the dry ingredients first. I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast here. I've done both a 1/4 and a 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. I just did one with a 1/2 teaspoon and it seemed like it gave it a little bit more rise, so you can do either or. We're going to take our Italian seasoning, spread that around. Again, to taste, depends on how much you want to do. I think I usually do maybe a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half, maybe a little bit more. But again, it's to taste. And you can use any seasoning you like, just experiment, see what you like better. We've got our salt. Again, I just kind of eyeball the salt. I think it's probably, 1/2 tablespoon, something like that. But again, do it to taste. See how you like it. Do another loaf if it's too much or too little. Either way. All right, we're going to take those dry ingredients and we're going to spread those out before we pour the water in. That just allows us to disperse everything within the flour. That way you're not, you got a certain portion as you mix it that's overloaded on either salt, seasoning, or the yeast. Let's go ahead and pour the water in, warm water. You can use cold water, either way. I tend to use warm water. I just feel like it might activate the yeast a little bit sooner and get it going faster, but I don't know. So what we want to do, we want to mix this up well until all the flour is wet, until all the dry pieces are mixed into the dough. So around the edges, on the bottom, you want it to be a shaggy dough. When you look at it, there's peaks and there's rips and stuff like that. And do it until all the stuff is off the bottom. Once that's done, we're going to cover that. You can use a wet towel, you can use saran wrap, you can use a dry towel, pretty much just to cover it so that it doesn't dry out and get hard edges. We're going to let that sit for about 3 or 4 hours. Then we're going to come back. You can go longer, you just don't want it to overproof. Come back, let's take the towel off, and then we're going to spend some time shaping this a little bit. Flour your board. Don't use too much flour, because then it's just all over the bread and all over the dough as you put it into the oven. I'm using a spoon just to scrape it out, being careful not to put too much pressure on it, because we don't want it to collapse. We want to keep the air inside the bread, otherwise it'll collapse and you'll be stuck with a bread that doesn't shape well or doesn't rise well. So I could probably do it a little bit quicker than I am here, but just wanted to be super careful. Once you get that out, you can use a bread scraper, you can use a spatula, plastic spatula, rubber spatula, use your hands. Either way, we're going to fold the corners in. We're just going to start folding it in on itself. You don't have to do it a ton of times, just a quick 3-4 folds. We're going to flip it over and then we're going to start shaping it. Again, I'm spending way too much time shaping this just because I got too caught up in trying to make it just the right size and the right shape. But it should only take you maybe 5 or 6 turns, maybe 10 turns as you do it. Once you get it into a nice round shape, you're going to grab some parchment paper, grab a piece of parchment paper, grab a bowl, or here I had a proofing basket that was real close, so I grabbed it, put the parchment paper on top. I'm going to take that dough and I'm going to put it right on top of the parchment paper to sit in that proofing basket for a little while I get the oven preheated. It doesn't take too long. Ovens preheat at different rates. Mine, I think, is about 15 minutes, so I just let it sit for 15 minutes until I'm ready to go. We're going to cover it again during that process because, again, we don't want it to dry out too much. So to preheat the oven, go ahead and start the preheat. The temperature that you want to get your oven to, in this one I'm doing about 475. So once we've got it to 475, we're going to take the Dutch oven and put it into preheat in the oven as well. Get it nice and hot. If you don't have a Dutch oven, don't worry about it. You can use a casserole dish I've used before. Anything that you can put that dough in and cover it would work, and they've turned out just as well. The reason that we cover it is to keep some steam in it. So here you see that I'm using a blade to score the dough. That blade is terrible. Doesn't do a very good job. I've used scissors before I got that blade. Scissors worked better than that one. You could use a razor blade that you have as well. So once you've scored it, put it in the Dutch oven or put it in your bowl, parchment paper and all. Makes it easy to remove. And go back to scoring it. That allows the bread to expand as it's cooking, so you don't get these cracks and breaks in the crust or blowouts in certain areas that have, natural weakness to it, where that steam and that the bulk is gonna come out of it. So, all right, now that we've done that, we're gonna cover it. We're gonna put it in the oven, and again, covering it allows the steam to stay inside that dish or that Dutch oven, so that it gives it a nice moist atmosphere to help the outside of the bread when you do take it out to crisp up. You don't want the crust to crisp before the bread's finished cooking internally. So that keeping the lid on it helps with that. We're going to set it to 30 minutes. Let that bake for 30 minutes. Once the 30 minutes is up, we're going to take the lid off. So now you can start getting that crispness on the crust. Get some color on it. You want it to be a nice golden brown. As you take the cover off, 10-15 minutes is really what you need. If you need to do longer, you can do longer. Here I'm doing 10 minutes. Just watch it. Keep an eye on it so that you don't overdo it or underdo it. Again, you want it a golden brown, looking like this that I just pulled out of the oven after that 10 minutes. So get yourself a cooling rack if you can. These are fantastic. That way it allows it to cool all over from each side. You don't have to have one. You could set your bread aside and let it cool on its own, but they're nice to have just so you get the cooliness all the way around it. So you're going to set that on there. You can see where I scored it, but you can also see some of the cracks too where that score didn't necessarily take and it started to expand without that. I like that personally because it gives it some character and looks pretty cool. But let it cool for about an hour before you cut into it. That way it finishes cooking internally and you don't lose some of the air and the steam that's inside. So you should be ready to go after that hour.
All right, your loaf should be done by now. Once you pull it out in the oven, you've let it cool. It's good to go. Cut it in half and enjoy it. This is a loaf that I did separately than the one that you see in the video. It should have, but it's got a nice spring to the crumb. The crust is nice and crispy. And if you take a look, I didn't score this one like I did on the other one. So it's got some of the natural expansion that gives it some of that character as it's baking and starts to split out. So you've got that. Cut off a slice. Fantastic. You can really taste the seasoning in it, the Italian seasoning. The butter adds that extra flavor, crispness of the crust, and the nice spring in the dough. It's really good. You don't necessarily have to use just the Italian seasoning like I was talking about before. Try some different things. Cinnamon and raisins, cranberries, dried cranberries, different options that you have. Next loaf I'm going to dice up some jalapenos and then put some, mix that into the mix. And then before it goes into the oven, I'm gonna put some cheese on top and try to have like a jalapeno cheese loaf and see how that goes. Some of the uses that we've done with this bread, particularly the Italian one, we've made chicken pesto sandwiches that have sliced chicken, sliced tomato, pesto, some lettuce, mozzarella cheese on the toasted bread. We've also used them as crostinis. My wife makes an incredible spinach artichoke dip. So we've taken these, we've quartered the slices, put them in the toaster, let them get nice and crisp, and then use those with the spinach artichoke dip. We've also made some garlic butter and then use that with any pasta dishes that we have. Experiment, see what you like. There are a lot of options. This bread is so easy to do that it doesn't take much time. The labor isn't a lot. Really, the longest period of time is the time for waiting for it to proof and bake. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And remember, if I can do it, you can do it. Take care.